Hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming tonight. This is Emily's second solo with the gallery, so thank you for coming to celebrate it. The title of the show is Ecstasy, and the common thread that runs between all of the works, from the ceramics through to the paintings, is a search for ecstatic states, be that through magic, spirituality, meditation, dance, intoxication, or sex magic. It kind of touches every piece in this show. We're also really happy that Jennifer Higgie agreed to do a chat with Emily tonight for this conversation. She is a novelist, screenwriter, and art critic, and recently wrote a book called The Other Side, A Journey into Women, Art, and the Spirit World, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It's an incredible book if you haven't read it already. And we're just really excited to have her here in this conversation with Emily. So I just want to welcome them and welcome you to the space, but I leave it for you guys to continue. And I'll leave this here as well.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you very much for having me. It's such a thrill to meet Emily, because we're both Australian, not that, but it's nice. Yeah. Nice companionship or identification or something. Yeah. But anyway, this is such an incredible show, and it's, Emily's really exploring a lot of ideas that, as Sim said, are sort of very close to my heart. And I think I'd like to start maybe with my first question is, walking through this exhibition, there's an amazing sort of layering of time. You're referring back to sort of Renaissance prints, you're looking at 19th century and 20th century magical practitioners, you're looking at artists, and then you're also interested in the future, I think, very much. So maybe the first question could be, what is the function of magic for you? Because I think it's magic that links all of this.
Yeah. Okay, so I think when we were talking a little bit before, because we had a discussion about how I first discovered magic. So I think that I've always been very interested in the carnivalesque, or these moments of rupture, these moments of letting go. So you could think of the carnivalesque as being like the rave. And I think of the rave as being a very magical space. When the beat is going and you're letting go. I think of the flea market as being a kind of magical space where the object will find you. Also, I've worked at bookshops for a long time too, and I think secondhand bookshops have been very magical. But I've also been very driven and fascinated with ornament. And I've always thought of ornament and pattern as like the engine for creation. So when I finally kind of remembered, I think a lot of people are remembering that they believe in magic, and a lot of women are. I went through a kind of hedonistic atheist phase at art school, and then rediscovered, of course, I'm not an atheist and I'm sort of deeply interested in magic. I think the act of, if you're going to talk about magic, or you're going to write about magic, or you're going to make work about magic, you actually have to kind of try it out. So I was telling you about the first spell that I tried, which was a chaos magic spell. So chaos magic was developed in the UK, a little bit in Germany, but it was developed by Phil Hine and Peter Carroll. And chaos magic is essentially the personal symbol. So when I sort of found this out, I was like, this is what artists make already, but it's an intention. So magic also allows me to kind of figure out what is it that I desire? Where do I want my work to go? So then when I practiced magic and tried it, of course, at the heart of chaos magic is the orgasm. So then I was like, of course it is, because it's like this ecstatic moment that is deeply taboo. And so I was very interested in the relationship between magic and transgressive acts. So I think that the question, going back to the question with what does magic do to the work, is it makes it weird. It makes it kind of alive in a way that nothing else can. So when I do my own kind of magical processes in the studio before I start work, it will let myself kind of go into a kind of a more of a reaction to clay, where I think clay is the one medium which has its own autonomy. It will lead. It will often have a mind of its own.
What do you mean by that? How can it have a mind of its own?
Well, I think that clay, it often wants to be two things naturally. It will lend itself into two forms. It will want to be a vessel. It will want to be a provider. It will want to hold oil or water. Naturally we make pinch pots. And the other one is it wants to be a face. It wants to be a creature. It wants to be a statue. It just will naturally form into something which starts to look like you can see the automatic kind of process of that pareidolia coming, where you can start to see the face. And so often then when something sort of generally happen, it will just sort of make itself, and then I'll know it's alive. So I think when you're working with clay and you're building a figure, you'll know when it's sort of like at the point where it feels like it's kind of got a life of its own. And clay, of course, coming from the earth, it's one of the most magical substances. And then when you're playing with glazes are then also a participant in the work. So magic was this third other, besides ornament and the carnivalesque, was sort of waiting for something that to make sense of all of it. And that was this very powerful moment where then when I started practicing magic and realized it had real results in the world, in my reality, you can get, you kind of then can't look away from it. It will always, even if you stop doing it, it will kind of tap you on the shoulder and remind you with some strange synchronicity once you've sort of accepted it as a fact.
So, I mean, as a practitioner of magic, not just, I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about your practice is that you're not making work about magic. You're sort of embodying a kind of magic.
Yes.
And so what is the process when you're actually making these objects? And I think it's important to sort of remind people that all of this show was made this year, which is sort of amazing, you know, because I was thinking it must have been the last year or two or something. So there must have been a sort of frenzy of creativity. So what role did magic play in the actual putting together of like images like this?
You know, I think that the symbol's really quite important to me. So I have my own sort of personal language of like what magic means, but then I also look at other practitioners of magic. So you know, it's a strange thing I have this question sometimes when I teach masterclass, but like, what is it that you do that's what's your process of like in the studio, so I was saying to you before, like, I start with Liberesh in the morning. This is an adoration to the sun. This is a Aleister Crowley. You know, you do it 4 times a day at the different turning points of the sun. So it's a reminder of this like solar energy that you know has got this like.
And what was the line again? You said it before.
Hail unto thee, Ra and thy rising. So there's also something very fascinating about when you start really seriously practicing magic is that it's about memorization. So when you're first starting to do the calls, you're like reading off a piece of paper, but they get more and more powerful when they're so completely embedded in your head. And you've got to be in the pose and you've got to kind of also embody that moment. So I start that with the day, come to the studio, I'll do a banishing, and then I'll turn the cards.
And what is a banishing, just for people?
Okay, so there's a lesser banishing of the pentagram. So on the floor of the studio, I have east, west, south, north. I will work with the wands that I found in Australia by the sea, which is an old piece of driftwood, which has my magical name inscribed on it. I like to sometimes also not banish, because sometimes if I don't banish, then other weird things can kind of happen in the studio. So something else will kind of come in. I do another kind of special kind of call I have a very complicated altar system. I think all of it really makes sense as an artist, because when you're an artist, you're like working with all these different materials. And so when you start to get involved with magic, it just sort of lines up. You're like, silk paint has its thing, and then like glazes has its thing, and then these oils mean this, and then this incense means this. Like, there's something about it which inherently makes sense as an artist, like, because it's material.
I mean, the act of making art is an alchemical.
Yes,
you know, you're transforming one thing to another.
Yeah.
And the history of spiritualism in, say, modernity, I think, is a really rich and interesting one. I mean, you've got someone like Marcel Duchamp, who everyone sees as a sort of clinical conceptualist.
Yes.
Oops, you just threw that off my lap.
And
you know, he
how dare you?
Yes, and you know, he talked about the artist as a mediumistic being.
Yes,
you know, in a sense, I mean, every artist I've ever met, and I was an artist too for quite a long time, and it's that idea of images come to you or forms come to you, and you don't fully understand what the process is, but this seems like the right way to express something that can only be expressed in that language.
Exactly. But I've also been very interested in the tools of the occult, or systems of the occult. So there's certain tools, of course, or like systems, like when you're thinking about like the Ouija board, the spirit board. This is the alphabet. This is a system. This is like a kind of technology. And then like I've had other discoveries over the years. So one of them is the ring, the magical ring. You know, like Solomon's ring is this like powerful ring. And so then I started making a series of rings, bronze rings that are like, you give it a name and you give it a task, and it sits on a body when it's resting. And then this last thing that I've recently become deeply fascinated with, well, there's 2 other ones, is the wall drawings. It's this idea that I can like paint in a museum, and do a huge wall drawing, and then afterwards it will be painted over, but it will always remain in that building.
Yeah.
There's something very provocative about
It'll
making
be a ghost in a way.
Yeah, it'll be a ghost, and
Yeah.
it's very provocative as a woman to leave a mark in this. It's sort of like it's like graffiti hidden in a building, which I really love as well. And then the last one, which I have a deep connection with, is the marionette or puppet, because I feel like the marionette and puppet you've got like this, you've got this world that we're in right now, which is our reality, and then we have the other side, and then we have the liminal space, which is in between, and I call this the messenger realm. This is where the marionette lives, because it will kind of be a kind of a guide, and you can, as you're making a marionette or a doll, you're talking to it, you're being affectionate towards it. Like if I come across, I'm talking with Florence Farr, I'm talking with Ada Craddock, or I'm talking with Dorothy Anano, I'm like gently talking to them whenever I come near them alone. I'm being like, how's it going?
Yeah.
I know it was a long trip. You know, you're looking really beautiful. Like I'm sort of in love with them. You know what I mean? Like I think it's really nice to be in love with a doll. Is that the doll and the puppet? Like the puppet is so intrinsically linked to witchcraft. The puppet can be used for terrible things, but also great things. You know, so it's like a devotional object.
Yeah.
But the marionette is like this latest tool or kind of like a thing that it can weird me out. Like when it's sitting on because we'll do some performances in June, but like when she's sitting there and I'm talking with her and she's moving, it's doing something to me. It's like changing me. And so that's the only point of really being an artist, is when the work is also working on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all of these marionettes that are in the show, they're all going to be part of, or a lot of them will be part of a performance.
Yes.
And so, you know, they're not just these static objects that are on this plinth, they actually come alive. And
Yeah.
so who are these characters? Like, how did you arrive at doing portraits of sorts of the characters in this exhibition?
Yeah, so through the research, I was very interested in the figure of the woman, the female artist who's making work over the age of 40, which is in itself transgressive, because she hasn't given up and she's still like totally ecstatic about her work. And then this combination of that and the magician. So the perfect example of this is called Eiffel Cahoon. So Eiffel Cahoon had a complete devotion to her practice.
And she's in the end room.
She's in the end room. She has the bonnet,
Yeah.
and she's wearing the dress that's based on the Man Ray photo that you know we were talking about with the undies, very sexy. And I love Eiffel for many different reasons, but I love her for her transgressive nature and the things that she wrote about. She wrote about menstrual blood. She wrote about the scatological kind of magical components of urine and shit. She made incredible work over many different mediums. She worked her entire lifetime. She was a brilliant writer. She just, something about that transgressive nature, a complete commitment, a complete kind of like blinkered, you know, this is what I have to do. So Eiffel was
And what will you do when you perform with Eiffel? What will happen? Or should you not tell us yet?
Well, that will happen in June, but I think it will be very similar to what happened at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So the show in Sydney was based around different esoteric figures of Australia. So, you know, Rosaline Norton, who's now getting more recognition. Unfortunately, none of the museums in Australia own any of her work or collected any of her work because
She was the Witch of King's Cross.
She's the Witch of King's Cross.
Yeah.
So she had
in Sydney.
Yeah. So she had buck teeth and a gap. So she had incredible teeth, and they got more and more strange. Like I just love Rosaline so much, and she did some really crazy things too, very dangerous, magical things. But she was also a marionette, so the way that I perform with them is like it's an interview process. So I like when something's also, because I'm a teacher, because I love to teach, I also feel like the interview will allow me to tell their most like fantastic stories in narrative form. So with Rowie, you know, I would talk about how she got involved with this very famous conductor, and they did some really crazy demonic invocations, and he ended up losing his job, coming back to London. But like, there's certain things about Rowie that were very, you know, when people hear it in the public, they're like, maybe judgment comes first, but you need these characters to push things forward, because she was also persecuted for her beliefs. The press would always get a hold of her. So if we're thinking about Eiffel, I probably ask her questions around, you know, like why she left the Surrealist movement, you know, different things to do with like why she decided to live alone and do the great work alone. You know, like this is also really interesting to me, like when women decide to do the great work alone, like to make contact with the divine alone, because in some of these unions, there's couples and married couples performing sex magic together, but you can also do the great work alone.
Yeah.
And Ithel did that. So Ithel's one, and then we have Marjorie Cameron.
Mm-hmm.
She's with the Cape. So Marjorie Cameron was the muse of Kenneth Anger, was in the inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
So the filmmaker
The filmmaker Kenneth Anger, experimental occult, hardcore occult guy who had like, what did he have? He had it on the tattoo on his chest was 666.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kenneth Anger was a diehard Crowley fan. He also went to the Abbey of Thelema in Sicily. He met Cameron later in life, but she had a relationship with Jack Parsons, the Rocketeer, and he'd invoked her as an elemental. But she kind of embodies the figure of Babylon. So Babylon is this liberated figure of the woman who is the whore and the mother combined in one. Is like the sexually liberated woman who's also the mother, which is this liberatory kind of figure for the future, for the age of Aquarius. So she's more 60s, and then Dorothy Anino, who you know too, the incredible artist who made really fantastic tarot cards as well as spirit boards, but
she only died a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and very open about her sexuality. Did that great film where she's like being filmed on the moment of orgasm, and very, very, very transgressive, but also very funny. So I love Dorothy. And then Florence Farr, who was the performer, theatre actress, but also very high up in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So this is a very unusual.
Did she make an appearance in this sculpture as well?
No, this is Monia Mathers and Samuel McCarthy Mathers.
Right.
Yes, so they were the head. They were the head of the Golden Dawn. And Monia Mathers is also an artist. And then we have Ida Craddock, who's a little bit of an outlier, a Christian mystic who had a spirit lover, who wrote these incredible pamphlets about different ways of pleasuring women. Was persecuted, and
when was this again?
This was 1900 New York,
right?
And had been again kind of followed around by men, being like, "What you're doing is terribly wrong," just like Rosaline. And she had a spirit lover called Soph that she would make love to on the astral plane. And I was talking with someone recently, I think today. I said, if I could have a spirit lover, I would choose David Lynch. I'd be able to come back and come spend some time with me. He has a.
Well, we were talking about him because he has sort of influenced these with one word.
With one word, yeah. The names of the temples, they're called bliss temples.
Yeah.
So before he died, he was asked, what's your favourite word? And he said bliss. And I thought, God, yes, it's like bliss is like also kind of in the lineage of ecstasy, but bliss is not so dangerous. I think ecstatic states, we inherently know they're a little bit door openers, but bliss is like, that's his transcendental meditation coming through. Yeah.
And so there are lots of different characters in the ceramic sculptures as well. And so could you talk a little bit about them, what inspired them, these bliss temples?
Yeah, these bliss temples. So this couple here, which was photographed and used for the promotion, this is W.B. Yeats and Georgie Lee Hines, but normally just Georgie Hines. And so W.B. Yeats was part of the Golden Dawn, and he had an unrequited love obsession with Maud Gorman, who was an Irish nationalist. And he was just like absolutely in love with her, and she was very beautiful. And then 20 years after his unrequited love, they consummated their relationship, he instantly lost interest in her.
Isn't it weird?
Yeah. He's like, I finally got what I wanted now, I don't know, because he was like in his 50s by then. And then he tried to marry Maud Gorman's daughter, that she wasn't interested, and then he met Georgie, and then he fell in love with Georgie.
And of course he's writing poems.
He's writing poems, and he was a theologian.
Extraordinary poems.
But the thing is this unrequited love for him was his muse, and he always had muses. He always had to have something which he couldn't have, and that was Maud for like such a long period, which fueled his heartbreak, and like it kind of fueled also his. I think that when you're talking about magic, underlying all magic is longing, and longing is this very powerful erotic feeling. And I think that Eros is also, a magician. This is what Marcello Ficino says. It's like Eros is a magician. Eros is magic. So W.B. Yeats would have used this a lot in his life, and then he met Georgie, they went on a honeymoon, and she started doing automatic writing. And then he realised that she could be a channel, and then they wrote together a vision. And so then he had 2 children with her, and he's
happy communion.
Yes, very happy.
Yeah.
Very, and a lot of eye contact, no genitals. That's the whole thing with the bliss temples. Yeah, nothing pornographic, but more about like eye contact can be pretty heated, like how I just spoke.
Yeah.
Eye contact can be very powerful. Yeah.
And this is the Golden Dawn.
This is the Golden Dawn, and then the big temple at the front is Jack Parsons and Marjorie Cameron, and then I think the one behind. Oh, what do we have? I can't remember. Oh no, that's Eiffel. What's the other one? Oh, it's in the other room. It's the Hand of Eros.
Oh,
yes, this is Kenneth Grant and Steffi Grant. So Kenneth Grant, he came after Crowley, and his position on sex magic was that it's not phallus centric. It's not the phallus is not the important factor. It's the vagina. It's the womb. And he was like, we've got to flip this all around. Actually, it's the power of the woman. And he was in this union with Steffi, and she was incredible illustrator, and they had this order called Typhonian Order that was very, very British and very, very weird. All Lovecraftian. And if you read Kenneth Grant, it's really like magical reading, and you get really like, whoa. But if you read Steffi, it's really easy to understand. Steffi's a much better writer.
And then you've got an interesting take on Aleister Crowley as well, because he's usually known as like the bad boy of magic. You know, that he's sort of a
beast,
creepy guy.
Yes,
but
yes.
You're quite fond of him.
I think like what I came to realize is like if you're going to really practice magic and you're really, really going to do it, you have to look directly at this trickster character. And if you look directly, you realize that a lot of it is popular culture. Right. A lot of it's popular culture, and what he was able to do. Yeah, he's not a charlatan. He's a prophet in some ways, but he is also, he was also not a perfect human being, and that's often the case of someone who's giving a message. It's not and his message really is essentially what a lot of messages are. And he did some really serious magic, but I think the message is like, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And this is really not this statement of like, do whatever you want, be hedonistic, hurt people's feelings, and who gives a shit. It's more like, find out exactly what you're here for. What is it you're here for? What is your will? What is the thing that you need to be doing? And when you find that, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of law. That is your law. So as an artist, coming into your 30s, you're like, is it going to be this thing that I love to do, which is incredibly difficult and will give me no financial stability? And you're like, yeah, that's probably what I need to be doing. Some other people, it might be, being a vet. It doesn't matter. It's the will. Yeah. It's the will. You've got to follow the will. Yeah. And then everything else lines up. And then you get to meet interesting people like yourself. So it's like following the will, other things come along for the party. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, of course, the third component of the show is these wonderful wall images.
Yes.
And they're all sort of inspired by Renaissance etchings, by various artists, different artists. So, how did they come about? Where did they come from?
I've been studying Renaissance print for a very long time. So, like, my entry point was Jura. I've always been interested in, like, the grotesque in the Renaissance. So, the grotto was this important moment for me where, like, when the grotesque came out literally from the grotto. So when in sort of like 1486, when Raphael and a group of people went down into the caves of the sunken palace of Nero, and they saw on the walls of this palace these hybrid creatures, these women with fishtails and Horace referred to them as like images of a madman. And then they brought these up, and it was like the birth of the Renaissance. But the birth of the Renaissance is also a re-remembering of the occult philosophies. So, then everyone started to kind of look back to ancient Greece, which is like theurgy, this is bringing the divine into the body. But I'm very interested in that one era because it's like a very high point of like virtuosic technique. So like print culture came up like 1490, and I was telling you before about how it came off the back of armory. So they figured that you could etch into armory, but then you could make that copper plate completely flat, fill it with ink, put it through a press, make multiples. And it's that aesthetic, which is like this dirty aesthetic of etching that I love. So I did printmaking at art school, and I always loved to leave an etching plate in the acid for like an extended period of time. So I always loved it when it was like foul, they call it a foul bite. So the acid is biting in places you shouldn't. During this research, of course, you come across images that are just stick in your mind. So one of them, of course, is this allegory, Power of Women. Phyllis writing Aristotle. And so over 50 different male printmakers have made this image. This one is based on Lucas van Leiden, which I've like sort of codified a little bit with new kind of images, but both their eyes are like, you know, crossing because they're like giving into lust in this ecstatic moment. But when you first come across this image, you know, 600 years later, you're like, this is like Huckabee Zen. And it's like a giving into lust. So some of the printmakers would take an attempt to like make it look playful and erotic, and then some would be like, this is the folly of lust, you know. So it's a different, each printmaker has also its own flair, you know, like costume, like Dürer does it some his way, and then Hans Gordon Gries is like really grotesque. So I'm interested in the flair of the artists in different ways and how images were passed on. So this one particularly I felt like was very important for this like ecstatic moment, which is like a giving into like, giving into something which you know you shouldn't. But she conquers him because of her beauty. So that's the allegory, is like Aristotle is overcome by her beauty, which is also kind of nice. And then it's called Hunt, Hunt, Hunt. So it's like my name 3 times over. So
of course. I hadn't thought about it.
So she's like,
and I mean, there's a lot of humour as well.
There's a lot of humour, and I think that the penis
sausage shop on the left.
The sausage shops, yes. So this is from the School of Venus. This is a French etching. And we've talked about this, like I think it's the one which is like, we were talking about how like it kind of represents online dating. Like it's like a, you know, like a kind of, I don't know, something about the swiping, like it's a very detached, there's not so much, there's definitely not a lot of eros going on. But the School of Venus was a kind of a part of a series of books that were written during the French 1600s, which is like part sex manual, but also part like erotic, like turn on like erotic fiction. So you have 2 women in conversation discussing, you know, marriage, flagellation, fetishes, and it was a way of also kind of provoking audiences. And so this is the butcher shop, which is, you know, the penis is inherently an occulted thing. Like we don't get to see them, so when we do, we're like, oh, and like they're kind of like, I always think they're kind of also quite humorous, you know what I mean? So them being like kind of decapitated, there's something about them which is also invokes like a fear around that. Like it's a sort of it's a funny outlier in the show, but it's also it's very Emily Hunt, I think. So
Great. Well, I mean, it's an amazing show.
Thanks.
It's been great talking to you.
Yeah.
But can we have any questions? Has everyone got any questions for Emily? In this very it's got an amazing energy, this show. In terms of the different references, the different materials, the different sort of scales of things as well. But
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does the wall drawings, marionettes, and also the temples, do they afford you very different things in the studio?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So the ceramics are never planned. They just come. They just come from the place that the hands, they know what to do. The drawings, of course, are like very like systematic, but then I can lose myself in the details and making up patterns, so it keeps off then the appetite that I have for drawing. It can allow my appetite for drawing. And then the marionettes, actually, I make the hands and the feet, but I have like a beautiful seamstress that I work with. So then that part of it is very childlike, because then I've sourced all these materials from different places, and then I go to my seamstress, and then we start to make a doll. And then it's like, so I do the drawing and everything, I go, what? And can we make a dress like this? And she's like, yeah, but we'll have to do this. And then that part is like being a child. Making a dress for a doll is also extremely fun. Yeah.
oh yes.
The plinth of the dolls and also the outlines of the paintings are also quite organic, so they're not square and things. So how do you arrive at that, and how is it related to either the symbolism or magic or the imagery?
Yeah, I think that, well, particularly with these stands, I like when things look like small islands. You know, like I love an island, I love the shape of an island, but I also just have this sort of obsession with no two alike. This comes from like George Orr, the potter. So he had this like premise that nothing should be alike. So the idea of a straight canvas, the idea of like a square canvas, I can't launch myself into that. So each shape also kind of made the work. Like I felt like the dollhouse domestic space for this house of School of Venus made sense, like it's domestic. And then this one's based on the Grail. So you're thinking about like Babylon's Grail and the Holy Grail and then the egg. Like each of them, I felt like they needed a symbol or a shape around them. Because I just couldn't handle, everything has to be so by itself. A kind of, a marriage of the outline and then the interior. Yeah.
That's great. So do you consider yourself to be a witch?
No, I think I would consider myself to be a magician. I think, or maybe more like a source, I guess a magician, like I thought would be called a magician. So I'm much more interested in ceremonial magic. I'm much more interested in like the technology of magic, the invocations of angels. I'm interested in angelic communications. So I think that when I'm thinking about Wicca would be for me, I'm also interested in Wicca, I'm also interested in witchcraft, but I would think of that as more as natural magic. Herbs, calls, times of the year. So I think for me, I think I'm a little bit more based like back on like the kind of the hard symbol, like the sigil of Uriel, so this is, I'm a little bit more interested in the maths, or I'm interested in the architecture of magic, like the pure architecture of the invisible world. And I feel like I can get as close to that with ceremonial magic than I can with
There is a kind of crossover.
There is many crossovers, absolutely, heaps of crossovers. Heaps
Do
and
you
heaps.
ever find witches or talk?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And in a pinch, I'll definitely use a witchcraft spell. If I'm like, if I've got the material and I have the oils, I'll definitely go into a witchcraft book to like get something moving. Yeah, I'll kind of, sort of depends on what I'm working on, but inherently the next show I'll be doing in the Netherlands is about learned magic. So this is very much based around books. Yeah.
I'm really interested about how the ceramic pieces come about. You said they just kind of grow up organically.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I don't quite believe you.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many stories and narratives.
Yeah.
Behind them, are you kind of storytelling as you make it?
Yeah. I think that, with these figures here, like an accidental thing happened where like the chair like melted in the kiln, and so it's like tipping over, which makes them look like they're more in a static state.
Yeah.
But the doorways, I'll be like, okay, I want 2 doorways, and I want it to look a little bit Egyptian, because Egypt's like the heart of where all magic kind of begins. And then I'll sort of start making the door, but then the door wants to kind of make itself. So you can sort of force ceramics, but you also have to naturally let them fall into their position. But I think with the figures in particular, I think that the figures want to kind of make themselves, and then the architecture around them is a little bit like, I'll have like a system, you can see like I have the balls underneath and then that flat plateau, and then I sort of built up around that. But the decisions aren't really like, I don't do a drawing beforehand, I'll just be like, oh, that's what it needs now. Oh, and that's what it needs now, and this is what it needs next. And then it always needs to sort of have a symbol of the hand, because the hand is like this kind of, I always think of the hand as being the crucial creator. More creative than the womb or the phallus, I think the hand is. Yeah. There was another question.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask about another question about the garments the mannequins are wearing, because I wondered how closely did they map onto clothes that those figures wore, and how much was it kind of a conversation between you and your imagining of the energy that they
Yes. Yeah. Well, a lot of the kind of materials I've sourced have been parts of old clothes. So Dorothy's wearing a dress that I used to wear, and it's kind of been miniaturized. So I think of her as being like, this is a very sort of 60s like garden, like kind of like party dress. So I was like, and also the marionette that I have of myself was also in Australia, which is still in Australia, also is like the legs is of a very favourite jumper that I have that's like tracksuit pants. So I think there's also something about it belonging to me. But then the Indian dress that Florence Farr is wearing, this was found on the side of the road as I was walking to the studio one day in Berlin. And so I brought this to Sabrina, and I was like, can we miniaturize the best parts of this and make it Victorian? So we look at the era, and then this is a nightgown. And so this was also part of that era too. So I do look up historical examples, but then everything has to have a slightly psychedelic, a bit wacky, There'll be a little bit off thing about them, where it's like it's also this time now or something like that. It can't be completely directly referencing the era. It has to be something about it which has got a gap. There's a gap there. Yeah.
Do you have like a bit of a love-hate relationship with the puppets that, I don't know what you call them? Do you get close to them and kind of some days like dislike their personalities and things like that? Do you ever
That
feel like
is
that?
so funny. I love that. It's so funny because well, that definitely happened in Australia.
I might be like that.
Yeah. That definitely happened to me in Australia because I had a marionette of myself.
Yeah.
And I would talk to it often. And I would be like talking about my problems with the marionette, which is like a very Jungian thing to do, is like dealing with a doll that's in your own version. But yeah, I love them all, but sometimes I have questions for them. But I'm often quite softly spoken to them. Yeah, but I get them to do things for me.
Yeah.
I say to them, do this thing for me. And then I love you. And then I'm like, can you do this thing for me? Yeah. I get them to do things for me. I hope that they're doing things for me.
What do you hope will take away more than anything from an exhibition like this? Or is that not how you think and work? Do you care? Do you want us to feel certain things?
I think that the premise, like I was saying it to Sim about like numbing, how like with everything there's overlapping tragedy happening at the moment, there's overlapping frightening things happening, and everything feels like there's a snowball effect like at this moment. So it's like it's really easy to numb yourself. So I think that the show is trying to unnumb in some way to say like there's a great mystery, and if you kind of participate in the great mystery, it does make life. Then you don't have to numb, but it is kind of also frightening. So we're thinking about, we've got a numbing going on with either phone use or all the things. And then we've got like an unnumbing, which is being an artist. And so the artist cannot be numb if they're going to make good work. And the ecstatic state is like even more intense than happiness. So it's like, do you want to participate in the static state? Think about it like I do. I want to participate in the static states. Right now I do. It's not a numbing, it's like kind of taking something even further. Yeah. So yeah, no, I make the work for myself. I think most artists get to a point where they're just making work because they need to make the work that they need to see, because it's doing the work on them. And then they hope the audience will also appreciate it.
I'm sure we all feel unnumbed. Very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. I think we're done.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.